This conference will now be recorded.
Welcome back to part 2 of Asking the Right Question, QFT, Question Formulation Technique. My name is Cindy McKinney, and I am the Program Director here at Region 8, and I'm joined today by Mike and Jane Gorman, who are going to walk us through a little bit more about what QFT is and how we can really use it and integrate it into what we're currently doing in our classrooms. I want to thank the Schwab Foundation for underwriting all of these opportunities that we have to meet with you, and I'm really excited to get going on this. So Mike and Jane, tell us a little bit more about QFT.
Well, thank you. I'll get us started, and Jane's going to jump in when we start talking about the resources, because she's really done a lot of research on looking at what other researches might actually go with QFT. As we talked about last time, and we got into this whole idea, I want to get into this idea. I've got another quote for you. Scientific inquiry starts with observation. The more one can see, the more one can investigate. And I want to talk about why this is so important. And I'm going to take you to the University of Pennsylvania, the Perelman School of Medicine. And one of the things they ask of all their students in the beginning is they all take an art class where they observe, question, and try to come up with an interpretation of paintings, which a lot of times people say, well, gee, why is that so crucial in medicine? Why are they making them all take an art class? Because part of the whole questioning technique is observing. And as you observe, you make, sometimes even before you ask the questions, you make an observation. And from those observations, you then start making the questions. And so I want to just let you know that this type of idea is being practiced in many places, including a lot of our medical schools. So something for you to think about. Scientific inquiry starts with observation. The more one can see, the more one can investigate. Any thoughts you have on that as you see that, Cindy?
Well, I had not even thought about that, honestly. So this brought a whole new realm to what we're talking about with questions, because I always feel like as a teacher, it's my job to come up with the questions. And it's, that's my job. But first of all, I have to let the kids ask the questions and come up with them. That's a more powerful way of modeling. But then also, it really starts by calming your brain and letting things just come to you based on observation. That is a new discovery for me. So thank you.
Yeah, sure. And a lot of times, and I know we've got somebody who teaches, in fact, I was just going to say, Laura just said observation is a powerful tool, and she teaches science. And definitely that's part of that whole scientific process of being able to observe what you're even going to study at first. So thank you, Laura, for that input that you provided for us in the chat room. So let's get into what we talked about last time. We talked about QFT from the Right Question Institute, and we're going to dive a little more into what you'll find at the Right Question Institute during this webinar. But one of the things we did last time is we asked, why do we do it? Okay, well, it fits into STEM and makers. It provides student engagement. It provides that student-owned inquiry. It can connect to any subject, and it honors that art of questioning. Well, what we talked about, it's QFT, Question Formation Technique, from the Right Question Institute, and it really is about student-owned inquiry. And then how, we actually talked about how to do it, how to facilitate it, honoring protocols, which is so important, the 5 steps that are into it, and then how we transfer what Cindy had talked about earlier, how we transfer that questioning from the teacher to the students. And we looked over these 5 steps, if you remember. And I'll just review each one really quickly right here. First of all, we individually brainstorm on a sheet of paper. And I've got my questions that I brainstormed there that went with our piece, our actual comic that we used last year, political cartoon. And then we go into a group and we share our questions. So we're not suddenly just doing this in front of the whole class. We're doing it in small groups. And we'll talk about even how we do this in a blended learning atmosphere a little bit later. And then we label them as opened and closed questions, which is really good for the kids because they start learning what an open question is and closed question is, and they learn, number one, how to research those things and how to answer them. And then in a group, we keep on discussing what are those advantages of open questions? What are the disadvantages of open questions? And the same with closed questions. We then rewrite one of them or two of them, and we take a closed and we make it open. Why? So we can expand our thinking. But we also take an open and we make it closed. Why? So that we start scaffolding this whole inquiry process by trying to find ways to ask that question. It may be multiple now questions that are closed, which is a great start to the research process. And then we prioritize our questions. We're ready to research now. So that's what we talked about last time as we got into it. It's the QFT, the question formulation technique from rightquestion.org. So asking the right questions, part 2. Yes, the actual Institute has more, and I'm going to show you some of those things. Jane's going to go over some of the free resources you'll find, and then I'm going to finish up with how do we make this digital, okay? So let's take a look here at There Is More, and I do want to comment really quickly. I have something in the chat room here where I have a comment being made that in science we observe with all of our senses, and I think that's really interesting because I could take an artifact and just have the sense of smell and then have questions. In fact, a very popular activity a lot of times is to put something in a box, shake it, and then ask questions as the kids start hypothesizing what's in the box. So something to think about right there. So as we look at this, here's the Right Question Institute. And I'm going to go to a certain area, which is called the teaching and learning area. And as we look at teaching and learning, there's an area called watch and listen. Now, in that area, there are downloadables, like steps of the QFT process, or QFT on one slide, or experiencing QFT. These are all downloadables. There's also videos to watch, okay, such as the question formation technique in action. And then there are articles to read. And I love some of the names of these. Putting students' minds in motion, teaching students to ask their own questions, how questioning can drive arguments, productive debate, something we really need to learn about in our society especially. We then have an area under teaching and learning where you can go to some of these different downloadables that are useful for you to use with kids, such as the steps, the video guide. There's actually a lesson planning workbook, and there's a QFT PowerPoint template. So all of these are available to you, and they're all free. Let's say I want to go to a specific subject. Notice how every one of these subjects has a video, it has downloadable examples, it even has blogs that can be read about it in all levels, elementary, middle, and high school. So something you might want to take a look at there. There's also an area in this teaching and learning area where you can hone your skills, like using the QFT with special student populations. Or what if my students' questions go off the rails, which is very, very, very common, okay? We can also get into this whole thing of, in teaching and learning, how do I come up with a good question focus? And what do I do with students' questions after QFT, which is very, very important. So you can learn about those types of things. Or you want to look for something more specific, you're going to find it in teaching and learning. QFT with visual art, QFT for professional learning. I love this one, QFT and PBL. or QFT with social emotional learning. There's the C3 frameworks for QFT. And of course, the national standards in science for QFT. All of these types of things are all in the teaching and learning section. Also in teaching and learning, you can find free webinars, okay, implementing question formation technique. You'll either see them live or archived. And also, you can put yourself and your class on the map for QFT and really exchange ideas, those types of things. Now, further, you can get into self-advocacy. And when you go to the self-advocacy site, you can, the thing I really wanted to portray this is there's a lot of information here on COVID-19 and QFT with COVID-19. And so you might want to take a look at this whole self-advocacy tool. It isn't just COVID-19, but it's other things. But I think it's important right now today. And again, you will find all of this also in Spanish. I think an important thing to keep any democracy running is voter engagement. And they actually have some suggestions, some handouts, some whatevers for voter engagements. And this could be used by food banks, shelters, early childhood, youth programs, civic organizations. And then they have important links, and this is important, especially in one of our election years here, of different places you can go to learn more about voting. And last, we talk about careers. There's also actually some QFT in that legal program, and where you can look at, how do lawyers use this? What is some advocacies in the legal programs? All of that type of stuff. You will find that under. Now, you can click on the resources button, and under resources, you will find two of my favorites, which when we do our actual modules this fall, which you can participate in, we're going to give away these books, and you can have one of these if you sign up. In fact, you'll have both of them if you sign up. We'll be sending them to you, and then you can participate in a 4-week class that only takes up about an hour and a half of your time each week. And you'll go through the whole process live with us in a Zoom room using Nearpod, all that type of thing. So they've got the books. They also have a whole thing on micro-democracy. Also, under our work, you can register for access to their letters, their newsletters, and also free resources. So you might want to take a look at that under their site. And so I want to open this up. I'll look in the chat room, but also what thoughts do you have as you're looking at this? Cindy, Jane, go ahead and jump in.
So as I was listening to all of this, and I'm trying to think of it as I would as a teacher, one of my thoughts is, okay, I would love to do this, but do I have the time to do it? And then when you shared all of the resources and all of the ways that you can visualize how it could play out in your classroom, I feel like you have to dedicate the time to it, and it's worth it, because once kids learn how to do this, then they'll do it in all of their learning. So it's well worth the extra time it might take to present this and to teach it to them in a proper way, because it's something that they'll live with and have for the rest of their lives, in every part of their lives, right?
Oh, you are so correct there, and that makes so much sense. And what's the beauty of this is once we've taught them, it's a protocol. So we just keep on using the protocol. We just bring in a different artifact, and now it almost starts running itself.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say,
go ahead, Jane.
I think checking or going back to what Mike showed on the one slide of all the different subject areas and how you can take a look. If you look at those and you look at some of the blog articles that are there, it kind of shows you how you can use that as well, integrated right within a lesson that you might already be doing. You are going to take a little bit more time to have those students questioning and observing, but yes, it still is going to be something a part of maybe an existing lesson.
Yeah.
I notice Chris is out there and she says, wow, the fact that it's free is really helpful for teachers. Teams can work together, integrate, coordinate. That is so true. I've got another comment here. Wow, this could really work in a blended learning environment. And I'm going to talk about that. I love this other comment that collaboration is key. And so now we're emphasizing a 21st century skill of collaboration. But as you think about that, through that collaboration, we're bringing through critical thinking, okay, and also creativity and communications. So I think there's just a lot to happen with this. And so let's go on, and we're going to talk.
Mike, just real quickly before you go on, I noticed that we have another comment from Laura that says it's huge for student engagement. And I think that's one of those things too, and especially as we're talking blended learning, having, and going back to part one, students owning the inquiry, that's engaging. That's going to get them interested and hooked.
So let's get into this whole idea, because now that we know the protocol and we know what's at the Right Question Institute, what are some free resources out there that I can kind of combine with this? And what are some different types of artifacts I can use? Because we used a picture. They don't all have to be a picture. I just gave the example of shaking that box with something in it and having inquiry, and now we're using our hearing senses. So there's so many other ways, but Jane's going to talk a little bit about some of these, especially visual messages, but always think about how you can use all of those senses.
Yeah, and I love that, Mike, as far as earlier on the comment about using all the senses and the sense of smell. And I was thinking all the things you could do in almost any class, kind of related even to that. So we have a variety of types of resources just to get you thinking about things that might be other than pictures. So of course the images, but video clips as well. You could have certain segments of a particular video using video clips, certainly text. And I know Chris had made a comment in the chat room as well about literary text. And so we don't want to forget that you can just pull in text, or you can pull in documents and that type of thing. Graphs of all kind, infographics, objects, artifacts, word clouds, and we'll show an example of that for those of you who may have forgotten about them or might not be familiar with them. Certainly self-created, and in a blended learning environment, one of the things that you could do is have all the students go out and find their own picture of something, an insect in the backyard maybe, or something like that. So a variety of self-created kinds of things, live cameras, maps and charts. And of course, we can get into that manipulation if you're using augmented reality or virtual reality potentially. So, and this is not even an all-inclusive list, but these are some of the types of resources that you might use. So the first one we wanted to go to was the National Archives. And you can take a look at primary sources. We all know in social studies, but also in a lot of other areas, that using primary sources and having students looking at primary resources is very critical. And it's also something that's extremely useful for them to do and gives them that feel, that sense of the history of something. So as you go to the National Archives, when you click under the Educator Resources tabs, you're going to find a variety of different things. Docs that teach, and you can go right there. You can also take a look at their catalog to find some subject-specific things perhaps. And then also America's founding documents over at the far right might be something that would be appropriate to go into, especially in an election year, as Mike was talking earlier, and certainly for social studies classes. So that's the National Archives.
And I think how many language arts teachers out there emphasize primary documents, and social studies teachers. And so exactly. now we're bringing in this part of our standards along with this whole thing and engaging our kids at the same time.
And so another one we have is the Library of Congress. And there is just so much at the Library of Congress. So the main part of the screen that you see up on the left are the digital collections. And you'll see just a variety of collections. I'm only showing a couple of them there, but they have particular collections already pre-done. But notice that you can go over on the left and you can actually search for things by subject. So you can get into a little bit more of an advanced search for some very specific things in these digital collections that are online from the Library of Congress. I also wanted to point out down at the bottom right that there's a portion there that's called free to use. And so these are all collections, the little portion of the image you see with the fireworks, free to use things for 4th of July celebrations. So they're just a variety of pre-done collections if you want to take a look at a number of images that go with a particular topic rather than having to search them individually.
And one of the things, Jane, and I don't know if you can answer this, but with the Library of Congress, I know in some of the archives there's actual digital recordings and things like that. I'm not sure if they have that, but I do know there are
Yes.
things like interviews with World War II vets, which we're losing our World War II
Right.
vets, and so we could listen to an interview. I know there was actually an interview
That's a
at one
part of
time.
the American Memory Project. Yes.
Okay,
That
okay,
is
and
that is also housed in the Library of Congress, yes.
so that might be something when you think about sound recordings.
And so PBS Learning Media that you will probably hear us list as a resource for a variety of things. It's a great place to go if you've not been there. You do need to just sign up or create a free teacher account. But once you've done that, then you can take a look at video clips. There are some images, there are some interactives that you could actually have students manipulate and be involved with, have them observe, and then what questions do they have? So PBS Learning Media, you'll notice there has tabs for different subject specifics. So if you're social studies or English language arts, but you can use just all of these resources, and there are many, many types of resources and great vetted materials at PBS.
I think also at PBS, like I said, keep in mind that those resources could be sounds, they could be pictures, they could be videos.
Exactly.
If you're not using PBS Learning Media, go get it. To me, it's worth thousands of dollars. Possibly you're a school that's using Discovery Education. They have a lot of those types of things. And here in the state of Indiana, I don't think it's changed, but the DOE has supplied us with NBC Learn
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of resources there. And I'll go to schools that don't even know that NBC Learn is available to them for free.
And so it's probably a good time to point out that we will have an accompanying document that goes with this webinar that will list all of those resources that we're talking about, even if we don't have a slide. And Mike, you mentioned Discovery Education, and yes, for those schools who do have, this is a pay service, but for those schools who do have access to it, Discovery Education, their tech books, but also their streaming content is quite similar to what PBS Learning Media is going to have, in the fact that there are going to be images, there are going to be video clips, there are going to be some sound bite opportunities to view and have students look at and question, and even some text articles. So all of the things within that Discovery Education suite, if you have that available, would be great as well.
And just when we look at any one of these images, one strategy that can be used, especially in a picture, is called a slow reveal. And what it is the teacher slowly brings out the picture from a corner or the top or the whatever, and the kids ask questions as that's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And it really gets them interested in that image because they want to know what it's like in the end.
So we talked about Wordle at the very beginning, and for those of you who are familiar with Wordle, don't forget that you can go find text and you can create your own word clouds that you might want students to react to observe, and to generate questions. For those of you new to Wordle, what you're going to see is that I've taken, in 2 different examples, just some text that I copied. I pasted it into the Wordle machine, and then it's going to generate this word cloud, or there's 2 word clouds that you see right there. Just a quick note that what you have to do when you go into Wordle.net is take a look up in the right-hand corner. It's showing you that there is a Windows version and also a Mac version that you might need to download a desktop app. It's not working just with the web address like it used to, but you may need to download one of those. And then you simply take a section of text and paste it in. So for example, on the left-hand side, notice that you see all of these different words. And probably one of the first questions that you might have, especially if you're not familiar, is why is red the largest word that I see there? Why are brick, black, and town also a little bit larger than the rest of the font? And that might be a student question, but just to answer that for anyone watching who's not familiar, when I put in that piece of text, those words appeared more often than any of the other words. And so it actually weighted them and then made those words larger. So we were talking earlier about the fact that, we want to use all of our senses. And on the left-hand side, some of you may recognize this, but this is actually a portion from Hard Times written by Charles Dickens as an excellent example of setting, of creating that feel for the setting, but we're not just using descriptors of the place. We've also got things like monotonously and melancholy. So we're evoking some emotion as well. So that might be something that you would want to do. You could do that by just taking the portion of the text and having students react to it and ask questions and what have you. But by putting it in a Wordle like this and then making them really observe and come up with some of those questions, it may be that much more powerful. On the right-hand side, before we move on, is something that a lot of elementary teachers or picture book lovers might really enjoy. I was waiting to see if one of our other teammates was going to react to that. But the word inside is in large print because it appeared so many times. But inside all of us is fear. Inside all of us is hope. Inside all of us is adventure. Inside all of us is a wild thing. And this comes from Morris Sendak's book, Where the Wild Things Are. So elementary students could maybe react to that a little bit and take a look and try to ask their questions.
Let me give you one of my favorite activities with Wordle. Is I used to take the inauguration address of Abraham Lincoln, his first term, and next to it I would put his second term in a Wordle, both. I wouldn't even tell the students who wrote this or anything, and I would have them ask questions. And it's amazing when you look at the addresses, the difference between the first term and the second term. And it really gets the inquiry going. Because what you emphasized there, they need to know that those larger words are more frequent, and that's part of the inquiry. Why is that so big there?
So our next one then is going to be from the New York Times. Actually, the next two slides. The New York Times has something called What's Going On in This Picture? And they will post each week a particular picture stripped of its caption. And what they'll do is invite students to join a discussion to ask questions and to come up and try to formulate what they think is going on. And then there's a big reveal, usually I believe on Thursday evenings, so that you can find out what actually was going on. And you can get, when we go back to what happens, what do I do with the questions that students ask? This one at least is going to provide that answer then at the end of the week. I put on the slide right now the live webinar. This actually occurred on June 25th, using photos to promote critical thinking across subjects. You can still see that archived webinar, and they have others as well. So that's something that would be great to use. The example that I have on the right-hand side is one that I picked from a prior year. And as you look at that, take a look and think about some questions that you might have. And also you might think about the different things. I don't know, Cindy, do you have any questions about that particular one as you look at that image?
Well, I'm curious about how the age of the photo, the people in the front, so I'm wondering how long ago this photo was taken and what are they looking for? And are the boats looking for the same thing as the people in the front? Those are
that's great. Those are some of the ones I had as well. I like that. And my first thought though was kind of to go to an assumption that it was something bad that those divers were looking at, that maybe there was a body down there or something that they were looking for. But then I started looking more closely and observing and thinking, I don't really know that the boats are that concerned. So, you have all these different things going on. And actually, to give away the answer without making you go look for it, this was in Central Park in, I believe, 1991 in New York City, and it was a part of a cleanup. And so
Oh,
people were out cleaning things up around the park and in the pond. And these divers went down and, of course, found all of the water bottles and other kinds of trash. But also, I believe they said bicycles and baby strollers and some really unexpected items as well. So,
uh,
yeah, so that,
I think what's interesting there, and got brought out in the chat room, is it also can show how photos can be misinterpreted, or
exactly.
maybe it may be used as propaganda. And we have to look at ways of how we're influenced. I think another thing that you just gave here, Jane, and we talked about in the beginning, think of how little planning this is. I can actually use
Hmm.
this New York Times activity. I hardly have to do any planning, and I can even do it in a blended learning environment when the kids are at home. So something to think about there.
Exactly. And then a companion to that that's been going for the last 3 years is what's going on in this graph. And we really want to talk about the fact that taking a look at graphs, at charts, at diagrams, and infographics perhaps, and all kinds of things of that nature are going to be great. But here, the New York Times Learning Network has got 3 years worth of what's going on in this graph. And I just pulled a couple that I thought would be extremely engaging for students, but they also demonstrate some different subject areas that could be used. On the left-hand side, we're looking at high school sports injuries. And so I think it was per 10,000 plays or something like that. What were the sports where boys were actually hurt? What were the injuries, the percentage by each sport? And also it shows where those injuries actually occurred on the body. So that's really an interesting one to have students take a look at. My first thing was, why is it just boys? And so you're going to get some questions of those natures as well. And then on the right-hand side, from 2019, it's taking a look over the years from, I believe, 1986 to 2000, I can't remember. And my screen's a little small, I can't read that, but it's the size, the portion sizes of fast food. So you could certainly have students take a look at that. What a great thing in maybe a home ec class or something, taking a look at nutrition, and you could have students ask question, what's going on here? Why is that? What other questions do I have?
I think it's interesting. I see in the chat room there's this thought of what a great way to get kids just working with each other in small groups. And also I see in the chat room somebody put up that they don't want to really emphasize this too much, but what a great thing for standardized testing, because this really does get kids to analyze, to
Hmm.
look, and so just it's a key skill. And also what a great way to really emphasize current events if you're getting into current events.
Exactly. Earth cams, great site to go to. You'll find sites, or you'll find cities, you'll find different seven wonders of the world, cameras that are live around the world and whatever that you can look for. I just specifically pulled out their animal cams for this presentation, something you could certainly do with younger students because they love looking at animals, and it fits in with curriculum and so on. You can certainly go out and search the Indianapolis Zoo, or you can search the Smithsonian and that type of thing. But what I liked about this is when you went to the animal cams, they give you some of these pre-selected. And the first one is burrowing owls that they're observing in Boynton Beach, Florida. So something that's a little more unusual, perhaps, that you could take a look at. Jellyfish in Monterey, California. And this is a good point or a good time to point out that one of the things you may need to do is scaffold a little bit. And if you're not getting students, especially maybe some of the younger ones, they'll look at that and you'll say, what questions do you have? I want you to come up with those questions, and they maybe struggle a little bit. So what you might want to do is just have them observe and write down what they see. And then after they've written down what they see, then you can go to okay, now what questions do you have? So a lot of different things that you can do with a lot of these animal cams. And Mike, I think you had something that you wanted to throw in on this one as well.
All I want to say here is look for any cams, anything. The animals is great. Maybe it's a bridge one. Maybe it depends what you're studying. But I think you emphasized very nicely that idea of get them to observe first. And
Mhm.
sometimes before anybody even writes a question, let's just take 2 minutes. If it's in a class, let's just take 2 minutes and silently observe individually first. Let's
Mhm.
not even go. And remember that first set of questions is actually individually so that we don't, so that everybody's being heard, which is so important. And in the chat room, I see this is so important because a lot of kids don't get to travel,
Mhm.
but now they suddenly can see other things and things they might not have seen.
So kind of going along that line, these are going to be some video clips, but they're all in 360. And so kids can actually manipulate some of the images that they might find within these videos in YouTube. And it's the virtual reality portion or subgroup channel for YouTube. You'll see it at youtube.com/360. And again, there's some great programming there from, like, well-known and well-vetted sources, National Geographic, the Science Channel. I love this, the witness the day the asteroid struck the jaw-dropping, um, or I'm sorry, the asteroid struck in the jaw. I kind of messed that one up, but you can see what I was trying to say. And so this is just a great place to investigate. And again, because of that interactivity and the fact that you can move those around and see things, just powerful.
That manipulation that kids have a chance to do, that kinesthetic type thing, even if it's virtually, is so, so powerful.
And speaking of powerful, a lot of people have gone to Google, and you've gone to Google Lit Trips, perhaps. You've gone to Google Earth. You've done a variety of things. This is Google Earth, and it's a specific section called Voyager. And I loved here that they had some pre-done collections. So you can see the different designs inspired by nature in the first collection up at the top left. Triangular structures, and it's a whole collection. You can even get into explorers, the early discoverers, and what in the world is going on with the Underground Railroad. And we'll let you take a look for that. But this is in Google Earth Explorer. And what will happen is that they've explored various things. And so just like if you're familiar with Google Earth, as you go from one place to the other, it takes you on the map and it shows you where those locations are. So we're talking about things that are going to be coming from around the world put into these collections. There certainly is more, but that was just one of the really great places. And going along with that, we didn't do a slide, but Google Expeditions. When we mentioned that you could do some AR and VR, when you take a look at Google Earth Expeditions, you're going to find some really great material that you can engage students with and have them observe and ask questions about.
It really is about getting, in a blended learning environment, getting rid of those classroom walls or getting rid of the home walls. And some of these really allow us to do that type of thing.
And of course, it wouldn't be complete to not talk about our wonderful art museums in our country and around the world, and you can certainly look them up individually, but you can find a lot of sites that will list them all together. This one happens to just be the Metropolitan Museum of Art from New York, and most of the museums have quite an online presence these days. There are collections, might be their current exhibits. You can walk through and tour museums as well as some of these, regular museums as well as art museums. But I noticed that at the Met, they had the resources for educators that might help you get started to know the collections and to actually see how you could best use these or find what you're looking for. But they have their timeline of art history, they have blogs, they have their recent acquisitions and so on. So this is just one of an example of many, many types of museums that you could certainly take a look at for your artifacts and your images.
And keep in mind that what's really neat about this is it can be used for any subject. In science, I want to teach my students to observe. And what a great way to do it. Or in social studies, maybe we're looking at time periods, and some of art can really help us in those types of things. So just don't think of this as art, but think about how it can connect with any subject.
And also NASA. You know, we've had the launch, the first manned launch here recently and whatever. And so wanted to point out all of the things that NASA has available in their image galleries. You can go specifically to certain missions. One of the things that a lot of government sites are starting to do now is put images up on Flickr as well that are public domain, or that you know, are licensed and free to use. And so that's there. I loved at the bottom, kind of rightish, they talk about space images from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And I was thinking back to what Mike said about maybe doing that slow reveal or something. This might not be a slow reveal, but it would certainly be something that students may not have ever seen before. And so it would be something to perhaps take a look at of viewing space and trying to figure out what is this picture showing.
Yeah, what a great way, if you're doing some planetary study, to get kids to observe the planets almost before they even read about them, and the questions they have as they do that. So the next thing I want to get us into is we've gone from some of the resources, and there's so many more resources out there. But let's take a look at this whole idea of the blended classroom, either kids in school, kids out of school, or both, and getting it digital. Well, I didn't show you this at first, but if you go back to the Right Question Institute and you go under Teaching and Learning, you will see something called Make Your Own Virtual QFT Kits. Guess what? It's done for you. When you go there, a lot of you have maybe used Padlet. If you haven't, check out Padlet, but they show you how to use Padlet with QFT. They have a guide for it. They have a template on it. They let you see it in action. Okay, so Padlet, here's where we're seeing the actual videos of it, where you can actually see it in action. Okay, and they explain the whole thing to you, how to set it up, all that. Or possibly you want to use Google Forms. And again, they have a guide, they have a template, they have a see it in action. And I could go in here and I can download these templates and use them. I don't have to reinvent anything, which is so nice. I can also use my learning management system. How can I build QFT into my discussions? What app add-ons are already in my learning management system that I might be able to use? How about conferencing software, whiteboards, shared documents in Google? They talked about forms. Well, how about Google Draw? How about Google Slideshow? Those types of things. Or I can go to other district collaborative tools. We can get into Zoom. And now when we're ready to collaborate on an image or something like that, I can have the kids open up two browsers or two windows, one with what we're looking at and the other in a Zoom room where there's only 4 of them. And what's really cool about this is now we're suddenly able to do this digitally. And people might ask, well, gee, that's great for at home. My answer back right now is yes, it's great for at home. But guess what? It might be necessary in the classroom if we're asking for social distancing. We might actually have to have these kids do it digitally because we can't get them close enough together to collaborate in a face-to-face way. A lot of teachers use Seesaw. It's another way to do it. Nearpod, which is a collaborative, kind of like Pear Deck for some of you that use Pear Deck. Google Docs, Flipgrid, which is another free tool that you might want to try. But all of these, especially if you've used them, you can start seeing, oh, I think I see how I can use this. Keep in mind this interactivity of e-learning and blended. It's for the home. It's for the school. It gives us a chance to bring our e-learning and our blended learning up into Bloom's higher levels, or deeper into Webb's depth of knowledge. It allows us to do things like project-based learning, because project-based learning is so based on inquiry. So keep all of these things in mind as you go on. And from here, any thoughts, Jane, Cindy, anything that's on your guys' mind?
So I had a couple of thoughts, and I think one of them you brought up in the first part of the series, which is the idea that engaging kids initially increases the likelihood that they're going to remember or retain the information that you want them to remember. So if you're a teacher who's feeling like you're spinning your wheels teaching them content and you taught them this last year, or you know they've had it and they don't remember it, it's probably because, you know, it was forgotten. And why was it forgotten? Maybe because it wasn't taught in a way that engaged the kids. And we know from our looking at brains now that we can do this, that we see that when kids are engaged, the likelihood of them retaining the information we want them to retain increases. So using this QFT is not just going to be something that will be fun and that will be engaging and that will be a different approach. It's actually going to increase the likelihood that they're going to remember what you need them to remember. So it's a brain-based approach in my mind.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and what's interesting about that is so many times, like when I go from state to state, some lesson plans actually ask, how are you going to activate the learning?
Right.
What a great way to activate the learning.
The other thing I noticed is this is automatically differentiated. So if you have a student that does not speak much English, if you have a student that's reading 2 levels above, if you have, you have all these variations in your classroom. But if you're asking all of them to simply look at a picture or watch a video or listen for something and then generate questions, you don't have to worry about leveling it. It's already differentiated. So you've got this built-in differentiation tool that you're using. So you can feel like, hey, I'm differentiating here. I'm meeting the needs of all of my kids with this activity. So those are the 2 like big picture thoughts that came to my mind as I was listening to what you're sharing.
What's wonderful in what you said there is that differentiation is being done in a collaborative group so that you have kids learning from each other at all levels, which is powerful.
Very powerful.
Jane, did you have anything, or did you see anything in the chat room?
Well, I did. I was seeing that there was something from the chat room that students care more about the questions that they ask than the questions the teacher asks. So again, we're talking not just engagement, but getting them to be inquiring, to learn that questioning is good, that it's okay, that, when I'm generating it, it's once they get going, they keep doing more. And it reminds me of something that I read within the Right Question website on one of the teacher blogs, and it was an English language arts teacher in high school who decided to use this, and she found that it was just really interesting. They were taking a look at vocabulary actually, and she wanted to make sure that all the students actually understood the vocabulary words she was trying to get across as they were studying a novel. And they had quite a discussion of what is home. And so that was just one that was powerful to me. And one student was really able to share with the group something that no one else had really thought of. So you really bring out the wisdom of the crowd. You bring out the fact that people have different views and can come up with some really meaningful contributions.
I know one of our presenters will love this, but I'm sitting here thinking about how could we even use QFT with sketchnoting. When you start thinking, I thought of that when you said home, because even everybody's visual picture of home is different. And so I'm going to close the discussion here with, I love what I just saw in the chat room, and it says, hopefully this leads students to ask questions in general in a class, which that's building the culture. And we want to build that culture of inquiry. And so thank you for that in the chat room there. Reminder, let's keep in mind that let's learn from the University of Pennsylvania here, from their med school, that we need to learn to observe. And from those observations, we need to learn to inquire. And as we inquire, we will actually have that opportunity to not only answer the questions, but learn how to answer the questions and come up with new questions, which is so important. Scientific inquiry starts with observation. The more one can see, the more one can investigate, which is so important to a democracy. Reflection here, importance of student-owned inquiry. using a process, connecting subjects, researching skills, okay, which is so important that we need to teach our students, and emphasizing inquiry or the question. And any last kind of reflections you have there, Jane?
I think you've covered everything quite well.
Okay, okay. Where can you get some of the sources? First of all, I've got a tiny URL from my blog that will go over QFT for you, talk about it. Of course, we will have, along with this, a list of all the resources we did talk about today, and that will accompany this webinar. Also at indianamakerspace.weebly.com, if you go to online PD, you will find more information and you can dive into it there, because remember, inquiry is part of making, and something that's so important. And I invite you, watch our newsletters, announcements from Region 8, because we're going to have a workshop where you can get credentials, then credits, some free books. Well, we're going to do this in the next couple months, probably once school starts, and you can partake or be part of this whole workshop that we will do virtually, online, both synchronous and asynchronous. So keep that in mind. Cindy, this is yours, because we're going to go back to Region 8 and also look for you on a close.
Thank you so much. So again, we also have this video and other videos that we've recorded posted on our website. You just click on the professional development icon in the center, the one by the green picture, and it'll go to the very bottom and it talks about online learning, and all of our videos that we've created over the summer are there, including this one will be there very soon. And I just want to thank Jane and Mike again for leading us in this discussion, and also the people in our discussion, in our chat room, Laura, Chris, Steve, Barb, thanks for all of your insights. And again, I want to thank the Schwab Foundation for underwriting us today, as they have in the past and will in the future. And we look forward to seeing everyone again at our next session on something exciting. I don't know, you're going to keep me in the dark on this probably until it's time to show us. So I'm excited. So thanks again for everyone here. Have a great day.